Welcome to this special. Oh, welcome to this special episode of Against the Mountains of Madness. I'm your host Jason,
And I'm John C. Wright.
and on this episode, we're doing the Church, Future and Past. So there's been, as we record this, the Pope passed away about a week ago, and yep, with the passing of Pope Francis, we take a moment to reflect on the Church's past and the future. There's also been a bit of a kerfuffle, I like that word, about a Pew poll of American Catholics. Apparently 840 leave the church for every 100 that join. And there's been a few different takes on that. I thought I'd throw our hat in the ring on that as well. But I guess to start with, the passing of Pope Francis, I don't know. I've been all over the map on Pope Francis. Very, very lukewarm on him before crossing the Tiber. So it took a while for me to for that to go away. I think my opinion at this point is he was just an average pope. Very pastoral and ecumenical in his outlook, but kind of careless with his words at times, which I found frustrating. So, but I've had people going, "Oh, he was the greatest pope," and others going, "Oh, he was basically the anti." Oh no, he was an amazing pope, probably not the greatest, but also, and others going, "Well, he's basically the Antichrist leading the church astray," and the church, the seat of Peter is the seat of Peter is empty, and blah blah blah, crazy stuff. Seeds are mad, but anyway. But I think I don't know what your thoughts were. My thoughts were Pope Francis was an average pope.
When I
Just,
I came into the church when Benedict XVI was Pope.
fair
And
enough.
I came in, you came in from Protestantism, but I came in from the icy wilderness of atheism, where, to be quite blunt, even a witch knew more about the spirit world than I did, okay, because I thought none of it was real. Benedict
enough.
XVI was an articulate, philosophical man, and he could write things that spoke to me directly because he wrote on the same kind of intellectual level that I'm used to. I'm used to dealing with these things on. Some people pick their denominations based on a number of factors, but for me, the only factor that I considered was whether the doctrine and the dogma seemed to be correct, seemed to be the correct teaching of Christ. And of course, I had not being a non-Christian, I had no standard to work from except for
That's fair.
what Christ Himself had said to me, which was not very much, not very complicated, not very long. So Pope Francis, when he first was anointed, is that the right word? It's not a coronation. It's a
Elected?
elected,
I don't know.
elevated. When he achieved the dignity of Holy Father, there were great hopes in a lot of people that he would have a different pastoral approach that would speak much more to the common man and would show a degree of humility and charity that the Catholic Church could always use. And at first, I was a firm advocate for the Holy Father because every single time the press quoted him, and I used to be a newspaper editor, I used to be a newspaper man. I was in the press, so I know how they operate. Okay, every time they quoted him, I knew when it was a misquote, and I would look it up. And sometimes I even looked it up in the original Italian sources, and had a friend of mine translate it for me. And the press lied every single time they quoted him. Okay,
I noticed
not
that
once
very
or twice,
quickly, yeah.
not 5
Yeah,
times out
every
of 10, not 8 times out of 10, 10 out of 10. Now, it took me some considerable effort to look up, to chase down and look up the things in the original sources. So after about the 12th or 13th time I had done this, I became convinced, and I'm sorry to say wrongly, that the Pope was firmly and traditionally Catholic. Well, he's not. He's a product something of the modern day, and he takes some of his cues from South American Catholicism, which tends to be slightly more favorable to Marxism and to some other modern ideals than I think is proper for the dignity of the office. But
fair.
even so, even when he would say things that I found embarrassing or divisive, when he was asked about honest-to-goodness denominational doctrine, he would say what the church teaches. He did not try to innovate. He did try to cut around the edges, and some of the politicking was not to my taste. But I am
Mm.
hardly going to speak ill of the dead, especially if the Holy Father. If I'm a soldier in the army of Christ as a faithful Catholic, I suppose I'm allowed to complain about my CO like every like every foot soldier in the history of the world, but I don't want to do it in front of the enemy. You know? So
Well,
when the
yeah.
Pope also I'll say just this one thing out of many things I could say. Pope Francis came up and stood up for the Little Sisters of the Poor when they were being harassed
Mm.
and persecuted, and I use that word
Yeah.
advisedly, by the
By
Obama
Obama.
administration for daring to not want to murder babies or pay for the murder of babies in the womb. Okay?
And
And
it's
he
that was so insane
and
too.
he
Like
the,
they're
of
Catholic
all
nuns.
people, of all people, the Little Sisters of the Poor, okay, who take care of the dying elderly who are alone and have no one else.
Mm.
And he stuck up for them, and he publicly announced, and when they asked him about the gay marriage and all that stuff, he just basically said no. He said the church does not support that.
Mm.
Unfortunately, he also said some things in public that were ambiguous when he should have been clear. And
Yeah.
he made a change or two to the catechism that made it more ambiguous when it had been clear on questions like the death penalty. I'm hoping
Mm.
the next pope can bring some clarity where the good father here brought a little bit of obscurity, which he should not have done. But again,
Mm.
it's not my. I'm a sheep. He's the shepherd, and he's not the sheep owner. He's just the hireling, hired by Peter to do his job, and Peter's just a servant of an even higher authority whose name is too dreadful to mention. So may God bless the person. May God bless the man. I hope that every faithful Catholic prays a rosary for the Pope and prays
100%.
for the Church. And I think the Church is going to undergo some amazing changes in times to come. And we need all
Mm.
the guidance we can get from the Holy Spirit and from the Holy Mother. So
I'd agree with that. I mean, as I said, I don't think he was bad at it. I mean, I think he was just run of the mill. I mean, very pastoral and ecumenical, not as theologically hardline as I would probably like, but you know, what are you going to do?
but you and I don't
Pope
know
is
how
the
many
Pope is a man.
people who were turned off by the rigidity of the traditional church might have been willing to give the Catholic Church a second try once the liberal press kept telling him that the new pope was one of them, which he was not, but they were trying to put that across. That was one of the lies that the press was trying to push across the goal line for many years. We might have
Wouldn't
captured a
they?
few souls because of that. I mean,
Wouldn't
do
they
I
be
do I know the
quickly
workings of do
disabused
I
of
know
it
the
after?
workings of God? I do not.
That is certainly true. But I mean, wouldn't they have been quickly disabused of that after they came in the door? You'd hope so. Probably not.
Maybe, but it depends on whether or not the church that they go to preaches against abortion,
I
which
guess
mine
so.
does, and many do not. I mean, our pastor in his homily has mentioned certain social issues uh, repeatedly, and I hear from my Catholic friends who go to the diocese that they don't. That they just say, care for the poor, which is a good message. Certainly, for care for the poor, but we also have to overthrow the worldly powers that are currently you know
Yeah.
currently corrupting the world.
Yeah. Well, you know, I agree. So, um, I wonder what the next pope will be like. I don't know who's going to be elected. I don't follow the internal politics
They're
of the Catholic Church that
they're
closely. I don't
already
care enough.
they're already making book on the and taking bets on betting websites. So that tells
Oh,
you
I'm sure they
that
are.
tells you
I'm sure they
something.
are. But I mean, like, the Curia decides no one else gets a vote. So,
Yep. And
um,
even the Curia, I don't know if they understand how mysteriously the Holy Spirit moves.
hmm,
So
which brings us to the question, because I mean, I've seen various comments saying, "Oh, the next pope will be more conservative," or Francis stacked the Curia, and now the next pope will be as bad or worse than him. Usually, people saying, "Well, he's not really the pope," blah blah blah, um, or he's the Antichrist.
hey, we've had worse popes in the past. At least he didn't keep a mistress, and he hasn't doesn't poisoned anyone
Well,
like
that's
some of the Borgias did. So
yeah. I mean,
look,
the
when the
bar is
Pope moves
the.
to Avignon, then I'll be really critical. But if he stays in the Vatican, I'll be fine.
Hey, look. I mean, like the low bar for the Pope is someone like Alexander the Sixth, who, yeah, one of the Borgia popes, or
Yep.
one of the Johns who had mistresses in the Vatican and died by being killed by, supposedly died by being killed by an enraged husband who caught him in bed with his wife.
Well, let me just say two things
So,
about that.
you know,
We have to be a little forgiving because if you're living in Italy, some of those Italian women are the most beautiful women in the world. So you have to understand the degree of temptation that a man might be under. But second, Italy does have a method of correcting for certain of its sins by having enraged husbands carry out the vengeance of God. So there's a plus and there's a
but I mean,
minus. If it had been in Germany, it would have been handled more legally, and in England, they would have not raised their voices when they conducted revolutions. The different nations are
that's
guided by
true.
a different national spirit, by a different angel, in my opinion.
That's true. But I just laugh when people talk about how Francis is just like the worst pope imaginable.
What I
Like,
laugh at is the
do you
World
know
War
any history at
is
all?
what I laugh at is guys who think that the Pope during World War II was cooperating with Hitler when he was one of the most staunch bulwarks against the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. This guy.
Mm,
In fact, when Hitler was planning to raid the Vatican and capture the Pope and kill the cardinals, uh, and the Pope got wind of it, he wrote a letter of resignation, which he hid in the Vatican, so that if he got captured, he could later say that he had not been Pope at that point. And he ordered his cardinals to flee to other countries, to flee to other neutral countries. You see, because he thought he was just going to get arrested by the Nazis and killed. But
mm.
at the last minute, a general named Wolf talked the Führer out of this plan, and so it didn't happen. But I mean, don't anyone tell don't anyone tell let anyone tell you that the Pope was cooperating with the fascisti.
No, but I mean, like, just anybody saying any of the recent popes have had a terrible blah blah. It's just like, do you know any church history at all? We've had genuinely evil men
The,
on
the answer is no. They don't know any. They
on the
don't know any
scene.
history at
Like,
all.
genuinely rotten. They've like, I mean, some of the popes they've been amazing saints and deplorable sinners that have sat in the chair of Peter.
Yes,
So,
yes.
and Francis, well, I he wasn't a John Paul. He wasn't a Saint John Paul II,
He wasn't John
but he
Paul
wasn't an
II.
Alex, and he wasn't Alexander the
Right,
Sixth either.
right.
Like, I mean, they're my sort of go-to extremes, I guess. But
Yep.
he was somewhere in the middle. You can
And
decide
what
whether he was on the good side of middling or on the bad side of middling, but he
in the
was just a regular pope.
the basic misinterpretation most non-Catholics have of the Catholic Church is they think the Pope is in charge. The
Yeah.
Pope is a custodian of a
Mm,
legacy that's been given to him, and the local bishops actually have a lot more authority than the Central Vatican does, even these days. You know,
mm.
so even if he wanted to reform the church and make it into a kumbaya, hippie, eco green commune, like some of my liberal friends think he was going to do, he doesn't have the authority. He doesn't get a vote
Mm.
on that kind of thing. So
Yeah, he doesn't get to change. He doesn't get to change all the settled doctrines either. Like,
he can change matters of discipline. In fact, one of the best things that was done in my lifetime was when a group of priests from the Anglican Church, our schismatic brethren, who are somewhat heretic, but not their heresies are
depends on the group.
the Anglicans. I mean King Henry VIII, the guys who
No,
wanted to
no,
get a
no, no,
divorce.
no, no. I used to be an Anglican, and the Anglican Church varies from staunchly conservative, very conservative reform types and stuff, through to
Okay,
pagan lunatics that will embrace every
I
every
I
variety of
I
sexual
went
deviancy imaginable.
I went to a Unitarian church once, which was even further off than the Anglicans, and they were basically pagans. They were worshiping the
I don't
life
think that
energy or something.
yeah, there's Anglicans, there's like real lefty Anglicans that are
Be that
in
as it
that
may,
sort of
one of the best
in that range. Anyway,
one of the best things that the Pope did in my lifetime was, and I don't remember which Pope this was. I don't remember if this was Francis or this was Benedict. I honestly don't recall. Uh, he created a legal mechanism whereby the entire
mm,
congregation with their priest could come over. They didn't have to divorce their wives because unmarried clergy is a matter of
yeah,
discipline, not a matter of doctrine. Okay, Priestesses is a matter of doctrine. That's something the Pope couldn't change, even if every single Christian on earth shouted for it to happen. It's not going to happen. We can't have priestesses in our church. Okay.
But married clergy is,
Married
well,
clergy is
married
a
clergy. Yeah,
matter
it's
of. I mean, Peter was married. It's mentioned in the Gospels. It's a matter of
you also
discipline. It's a
have
matter. It's a matter of church discipline.
outside of the Western Rite, you have married priests. Though ironically, the priests that are apparently the priests that are most in favor of priestly celibacy as a good idea,
Mm-hmm.
married Eastern Rite priests.
I'm not
Because it's a
surprised,
distraction from the job.
because you can't give the full, you can't give the job your full
Yeah,
support and full love. Right.
of course.
It's like having a married nun. Are you going to have two husbands? I mean, come on. You know.
Well, that's it. So, anyway.
So
But yes, no, that was good they did that.
the thing you
I
mentioned
would
about
agree.
history, a lot of Protestants don't know history, and a lot of Catholics don't know it either.
No.
Because real history, I don't think the real story of the Catholic Church, the real historical story, has ever been told. By which I mean, modern historians don't even mention supernatural events or signs and wonders that surround the changes the church has undergone, nor the changes that the world around them has undergone. You see, you will occasionally get
People,
some of that, but if you put it all together in a line, it would actually be rather surprising. So I have a list here of some dates and some events that I'd like to mention just briefly,
oh,
if you're willing to indulge me.
just before you do, I
Sure.
would also note, I heard a fascinating talk by a woman physician, or woman lady doctor, who was not a Catholic, but was brought in to authenticate a miracle,
Hmm.
a healing miracle, just to evaluate the evidence for the church. And she was talking about it, and she said, um, the Catholic Church takes their miracles so seriously.
Hmm.
They won't verify anything they're iffy on.
Right.
They're very, very, very conservative about it.
Right.
And also, she was amazed to discover the Catholic Church has been um, early adopters of all of like new medical technologies and things like that, um, so they can better authenticate miracles. Because I know
I
people
believe I've
mock.
heard of the case you're discussing. She was brought into there was a bleeding host or something like that, right? A bleeding
It
Eucharist.
might.
And
I
she was
thought it was a
asked to check the
healing. It doesn't
blood
really
type.
matter.
She was asked to check the blood
Yeah,
type, but she wasn't told. She was not told where it came from. She just said, do a test on this. Well, she did a test on it, and
there's something like
the
that.
blood chemistry showed evidence of a man who had died from a traumatic trauma, such as he would get from being tortured to death. She identified the blood type and certain other bodies that are found in the bloodstream, which are consistent with what you would find if you had lived on a diet of uh, uh, first century Middle Eastern food. Okay, the blood type matches the blood type of the blood found in traces on the Shroud of Turin. It's the same guy. Okay, and she was not told this, and she was shocked when she found out. I mean, shocked to her bones.
Uh,
If this is the case I'm thinking of, it might not be the same case.
it might be a different one, but I thought it was interesting, like, because people mock the Catholic Church. I mean, I've seen people mock the Catholic Church, and no doubt there's been a probably, at least in part, the reason for taking it seriously is the ridiculous trade in relics that has existed in the past, um, and claims to miracles and things. But no, the Catholic Church takes its miracles very seriously
Right.
and won't authenticate things casually.
Right.
Which I think is the right attitude to anything. If
Certainly.
you claim something happened to you, it's reasonable to. Well, I mean, if you take it seriously, then it should be tested and authenticated, and that's
Certainly.
true for anything. I mean,
Certainly.
nobody should just be believed on the strength of their word. Like, we should always check it out.
Right. Right.
I'm glad the church does that.
So am I,
I'm glad the
because
church embodies
despite
that.
what everyone says about us, we believe in skepticism as well as we believe in faith. It's the
Yeah,
people who call themselves skeptics who just have so much faith in science that it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I've talked
this
with
is true.
people. I've talked with people who had so much faith in the power of science to do things that science clearly cannot do. I talked to one guy, a brilliant scientist, who thought that he could prove God existed by means of uh, using a machine via astronomical observations. And I said, listen, He was a Christian, and I said, "You've never been an atheist." I said, "I used to be an atheist." No atheist is going to be convinced by your readings, no matter what, not know how. That's not the way they think.
Yeah.
You see,
No, they
uh,
don't want it to be true.
because no atheist that I know of has ever looked into the miracles at Lourdes, for example. Now, the French government has tried to scientifically test to see which miracles are explicable by science, which are frauds, and which are real. And oddly enough, and I find this tremendously funny, the scientists have ruled more of the cases to be outside of the realm of what science can explain, which doesn't mean that they're miracles. It just means it's outside the realm of science, okay? Then the
Yeah.
church has verified as a miracle, you see? So the church
That's
is more
hilarious.
conservative than scientists are for saying what happens at Lourdes is supernatural, is beyond what nature can understand. So
The standards are probably slightly different, which would account for the differences. But
scientists
that is very funny.
scientists have to restrict themselves to empirical evidence, and that's the other problem. They can't make theological deductions, and they can't. So in any
But
case,
anyway,
here's
yes.
here's the little bit of history I wanted to go through, because you and I were going to talk about the past and the future of the church. So let's talk about the past first, then we can talk about the future. Now, I myself think the future is going to be bright. I think it's so bright that I'm going to have to wear shades, because I think that
I concur.
I'll give you my reasons once we turn to that topic. But first, let's talk a little bit about the past. The past 125 years or so have been surrounded by the most remarkable signs and wonders that are never reported in history books and are not reported among Protestants, and even not very many Catholics know about this stuff. So let me just start with my list. Let me start in 1847. So I don't remember when was the Civil War in America. I don't remember when that was. So this is before communism was well known. They did exist in small groups. It was a year or two before the Communist Manifesto appeared. So Sister Mary St. Peter had visions of Jesus, and in one of the visions, she was warned about the malice of revolutionary men. And Jesus used the word communists to describe them, even though that word was not commonly known, and she had never heard it before. And he gave her something called the Golden Arrow Prayer, and told her to go to the Archbishop and to tell him to do certain acts of consecration and devotion toward Our Lady. The Archbishop refused and ordered her to stop talking about the issue. Okay, and she was warned that terrible things would happen. That the lies of these aggressive revolutionary men would overspread the earth if not. But she was obedient to the orders of her archbishop. She received another vision from Christ saying that you are going to see me soon, within a year. This is when she was young and in perfect health, and she did in fact pass away before the year was up, having completed her life's mission, which apparently was just to try and fail to get the church to take a spiritual stand against the upcoming storm, which Jesus foresaw and the archbishop did not. So the next year, 1648, is when the group of communists asked a guy named Marx to write a manifesto for them, and he agreed. And unlike someone like Hitler or Stalin, Marx was obscure his entire lifetime. No one really knew who he was, but his revolutionary manual caught on like wildfire, and there were so many political revolutions in Europe over the next 10 years that to this day, sociologists have a great difficulty trying to explain it. Because, of course, sociologists don't look at see what the spiritual reality is. They just look at the surface features. So, now, about 20 years later, St. Anthony Mary Claret was warned about communism. And this was right before the wave of revolution passed over Europe. So, going forward another 20 years, 1883. Oh, and I should say, St. Anthony Mary Claret is a saint who was seen to levitate and to glow with a divine light and to walk on water and do other things that are just remarkable, never mentioned in history books. And he also warned about the coming nightfall of communism. So 1883 is when Marx dies, and the next year, 1884, Pope Leo the 13th was in his chapel praying, and as he turned to go, an invisible force struck him to the ground, and he overheard a gruff, guttural voice that he identified as Satan, and a calm voice of the Prince of Peace, which he identified as Christ, speaking to each other. And Satan boasted that his final and complete victory over humanity was at hand, but he needed a little more time and a little more power. And the voice of Jesus said, well, how much time and how much power do you need? And he said, give me 75 to 100 years and more power. And Jesus, for whatever reason is known only to God, said, yes, go ahead. You have 100 years. You may rule over the church. You may rule over mankind. Do your worst. Okay. Leo the 13th, shaken, returns to his chambers and writes the St. Michael's prayer that most Catholics recite after every Mass. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Okay, that prayer comes from this event, okay, of the 100 years of darkness that are going to smite the church. Well, within the next few years, the machine revolution and the industrialization takes place. So called 1900 to 1912. We nowadays, looking back, don't seem to understand how remarkable the change was in just a generation between the time when most of your workers, most of your life was spent in the field growing crops or herding cattle, to machines without with human supervision are making massive goods that are being shipped by rail all over the continent. And at the same time, Christianity began falling into disrepair, neglect. Authors like Nietzsche and so on were very popular, and he declared God to be dead. God was no longer a major political force in the political world. In 1911, there were massive persecutions in Portugal, which also is just an event that I've never heard of until recently,
No.
and where thousands of 1,700 priests and religious were killed. Public religious ceremonies were outlawed. There was no more public religion, and the school kids were forced to march. Portugal of all places, you would never expect it, right? And the kids were forced to march through the streets carrying placards saying, "No more God, no more church, no more Christ, no more church." Now, people at this time, 1911, 1912, were so arrogant that the guy who built the Titanic, that wonderful steamship, said not even God can sink it. And he said this to the press, and the words got published. And he was not correct in his boast, okay? Why would you say such a thing? Why would you say such a thing? You're just asking for it, okay?
Pretty much.
In 1914, 2 years later, in Ukraine, some farmers who were mowing in a field saw an image of the Virgin appear above the cupola of their Orthodox church. And she warned them, she said, Russia, your neighbor, will become godless. Ukraine will suffer terribly in a world war that is to come. And I should mention, no one in the West used this phrase world war to refer to the Great War until 1940s, when a second war had been fought, and it was dubbed the Second World War. Does that make sense? So when she said there's a world war coming, none of them had heard that term before, and that term was not in common use. Okay?
It was the Great War, wasn't it?
Well, this is even what she's saying this in 1914, which is two months before the Great War breaks out. And yes, everyone at the time called it the Great War, and
the Great War,
and I still call it the Great War because I don't believe in this newfangled way of identifying things. So she predicted that Russia would suffer terribly in the world wars, note the plural, but would be freed 80 years later. Okay? So this is 1914. So 80 years.
Spot on.
2 months later, the Great War breaks out.
Yeah.
Okay. 1916, the Angel of Peace is seen in Spain. And in 1917, the Pope refers to the Great War, which had started as the suicide of civilization. He asked all the Catholics to pray the rosary against it. Okay. And 8 days later, the first of the Fatima apparitions began to the three peasant children in Fatima, Portugal. The Virgin tells the children to pray the rosary every day, and she also gives them an additional prayer to say, the Fatima prayer, which we to this day say at the end of every prayer when we ask Christ to save us from the fires of hell. The children are shown an image of hell, which is something you should not show to any child. Okay, the ground opened up at their feet, and they saw it. They saw the burning souls and the screaming demons and such. Okay, and Mary in the vision says that if the people of the world don't repent, a worse war is going to break out after the Great War that's happening now. Okay, so she's asked then for the consecration of Russia. She asked for Russia to be consecrated to her Immaculate Heart. And she says, if this is not done, then Russia will spread her errors throughout the world. Okay? And I should say, it wasn't done, and the errors were spread. None of the archbishops, none of the popes actually get called on the church to do the ceremony of consecration of Russia. Okay?
Hmm.
So, at the end of the Fatima children are also told that one of them sees a vision of the Pope about getting assassinated, which does happen later. And 70,000 people, they predict that a miracle happened at Fatima on a certain date, 13th. 70,000 people, including guys as far away as Italy and so on, come by to see it. And it happens. The sun,
Hmm.
uh, the sun turns into a silver disc. Then it starts spinning and gyrating and dancing and zigzagging. That people find they can all stare at the sun without the least discomfort. Brilliant hues of color leap from the ring of color around the disk of the sun. Then it plunges earthward. They all panic. They all think the earth is about to be destroyed. Some of them faint. Some of them pray for forgiveness. Some of them, and then it dances upward again and returns to its place. And certain clothes that were hanging wet on the line are now dry. So the whole thing takes about 12 minutes. People up to 30 miles away also saw it. Okay, which means that it wasn't just a local escape of mephitic gas that caused hallucinations and they all happen to have the same hallucination. If someone 30 miles away sees it and you have 70,000 confirmatory witnesses, I think you have enough evidence for even the most skeptical man to say that it happened. Okay? Now, that was 33 years to the day. It was the same time, same month and day as Leo the 13th heard Jesus and Satan debating. Now, at about the same time, that was the same year and the same month, Lenin entered Russia. Okay?
Hmm.
So the other thing that Fatima predicted was a light in the sky would predict the coming disaster. And in 1938, the largest aurora borealis ever seen spread from the entire northern hemisphere and was spotted as far away as Australia. And that was 10 days before Hitler took control of the army and a month before he marched into Poland. Okay. Now, here's another miracle that no one mentions. Portugal, before the war broke out, decided to consecrate, all the priests in Portugal decided to consecrate their nation to the Virgin Mary. And the Virgin, in a vision, announced that because they had done this, they will be spared the turmoil of the war as a miracle to show other nations what they could have done. Portugal is untouched during the war. They don't get attacked. They don't get
Hmm.
run into it. Untouched.
Hmm.
So, and 1945, when the atomic bomb leveled Hiroshima, there's one building left standing. You may have heard the story before. Do you know what the building was? Maybe you haven't heard the story before. There's one parish house that was not touched. Everything else for 4 miles in the area was flattened. There was one church that was untouched. It was right in the middle of the explosion. The Jesuits who were in there praying the rosary were not burned to a crisp instantaneously. They were not vaporized. They weren't even irradiated. Over 200 times, scientists have investigated them thoroughly. They lived long lives and they died in the 1980s. They were not affected by the bomb in any way, shape, or form, even though it landed
I heard
practically
them.
on their heads.
Well, yeah, no, I'd heard the Mazda. I think Mazda's headquarters survived. And someone was saying built Mazda tough, but I hadn't heard about the priests very
They
close
are
to
the
the
most
epicenter.
they are the most scientifically examined men of all time. So 1950 is when the Pope announces the doctrine of the Assumption of Mary, and he himself, though no one else beside him saw it, sees the dancing sun when he's walking in the gardens of the Vatican, and he took that as a sign that God approved of his setting in stone this doctrine. 5 years later, the Soviets vacate Austria after the Austrians decide to have a prayer, a nationwide prayer vigil to pray for their salvation from the Soviets. It is the only time the Soviets ever withdrew from a country they had taken over without firing a shot. There's no parallel to this event in history. So
Okay.
the Austrians decided to follow the instructions given at Fatima to the children as to pray the rosary on a daily basis. Now, 1984, which is exactly 100 years after the 1884 vision of the Pope Leo, is when the Pope gets shot by an assassin's bullet. It misses his major arteries by a miracle, by the slightest amount. They have no. He's a rare blood type, and they can't. The Italian doctors can't do anything for him, so he's going to die. And it just so happens that there happened to be people who came into work that day, even though they weren't on the work schedule, who happened to be the right blood type, and they volunteered to donate blood to the Pope, and he pulls through. After that, he decides to follow the instructions given to the sister at the very beginning of my little list here, Sister Mary St. Peter, and they decide to consecrate the Russia to the Virgin Mary. Well, one bishop decides that consecrating by far remote control is not good enough. So he goes to Russia. He decides to get on a plane that will land at 4 a.m. because he wants to be there for as little as possible. And he's detained by the border guard, who keeps being very suspicious that a priest wants to come visit the Kremlin. But the border guard can't get anyone on the phone at 4 a.m, so he eventually lets the guy go. The guy goes into the Kremlin, and with the holy wafers and with all the good stuff you need to consecrate a site, re-sanctifies the Kremlin because it used to be an Orthodox church. I don't know if you knew that. The Kremlin's,
the onion domes give it away.
It's a church. It's a church. Now, so that was in 1984, a year that will live in the hearts of science fiction readers forever because it's, of course, Big Brother's year.
Yep.
1985 is when Gorbachev announced perestroika, which basically was him throwing in the towel. After that point, no one could pretend that communism actually was going to produce peace, order, and prosperity. Okay.
Yeah,
Gorbachev effectively ended the moral authority claimed by the Soviets, and everyone except for American intellectuals understood what it meant. And the fall of the Berlin Wall was within 4 years. Okay. So that is the century that was given over to the devil, and we have come out of it. Except in America, and and I think in Australia too, and certainly in England, there's still so many communists, and they don't call themselves communists anymore. Now they call themselves woke, or they call themselves progressive, or they change their names. The same reason why, like a chameleon, to try to blend into the background. But their anger is great because I think their time on Earth is short. But all these things were foreseen, were forewarned. There were omens. There were signs and wonders that proceeded around these things. And one of the more striking things that I didn't mention was that the lady that was seen by the children in the vision said that that you were going to suffer terribly, and if you were willing to bear the suffering patiently that God would send, you would be comforted and you'll be rewarded, and the evil will fail. You see. So that is what I think is going on. Now, I am greatly elated by the recent elections in the United States because I think of this as a spiritual, not as a political conflict. And I think that the victory is still will be possible for my political party to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, as they've done so many times in the past.
They're excellent at that.
And they are excellent at that. They are experts because they're basically criminals. But I think the criminal nature of both parties in America, and the criminal nature of the government in England and your own government, is becoming more and more clear, even to the unwary. So that's what I think is of the past of the Catholic Church leading up to this point. What do you think is going to happen in the future? Are we going to pass away like everyone has been saying we're going to do? Are we now outdated?
Well, I suppose that's the thing. So there was it a Barna poll or a Pew poll? Someone did a poll of Catholics in America. And what they found was for every 100 people entering the church, 840 people were leaving. And some clowns dancing around in the streets effectively going, haha, the Catholic Church is dying, you're circling the drain, haha. And Trent Horn, an apologist I like, had a fairly sober take on it, saying this is a problem. Like, and I agree. I mean, it is like this is a situation to be taken seriously. This should not be ignored. That 840 people leave for every 100 that come in, but I mean, first I'd note people have been predicting the death of the Catholic Church since
33 A.D.
since the time of the first Pope,
right?
And the Catholic Church has buried every one of the people that
Look,
pronounced its doom.
If it's God's will that we be reduced to 11 men and some followers, we did it before. We can do it again.
Yeah,
because if God is for you, who can be against you? But
That
it
is
is a
certainly
worrisome figure,
unquestionably true.
you know.
It is,
But the
but
figures from
I don't.
Africa and the Middle East are also reversed. The
Yeah.
speed at which Catholicism is growing in those on those continents is shocking. People keep saying that Islam is the fastest growing religion on the earth, and it's not. It's number two. Number one is
Hmm.
Christianity.
Well, but there's also apparently in France this year at Easter, more people were received into the Catholic Church than have been received for a decade. In
In England, if I may, there for the first time since Henry VIII, there are more
There's more
Catholics
Catholics
than
than
Protestants than
Anglicans.
Anglicans.
Well, there's more Catholics than
More
Anglicans,
Catholics than
but I
Anglicans.
suspect I
Sorry, I
suspect
said Protestants. I meant Anglicans. It's not. It's not.
no. I agree. That's okay. Um, I'd note there that's probably more to do with the death and implosion of the Anglican Church than the cat. I mean,
Yes,
I'm sure the Catholic Church is growing, um, but the Anglican Church is circling the drain to a large degree.
they made
It's falling
they
to
made a
pieces.
bargain with a worldly power, the monarchy of England, basically. And when the monarchy gave its power over to the socialists after World War II, the Anglicans were basically socialists, and socialism and Christianity are irreconcilable enemies.
Yeah.
Despite what
Now there are
despite the many times people try to draw parallels between them, they're diametric opposites.
yeah. Oh yeah, they are. But I mean, the Anglican Church is strong in some places, but in England, I think it's probably done. Maybe we'll see. But I'm I'm not too concerned about the 840 leaving for the 100 entering. Part of that, at least, is if you look at who is leaving and who is entering. I'm not sure if the survey broke it down, but I would happily wager um, that the people leaving are people that get baptized as a Catholic, get buried as a Catholic, and probably get married as a Catholic, and maybe they turn up to mass sometimes at
You
Christmas and
mean
Easter.
Easter Christmas Catholics, possibly?
In the Anglican Church, we used to call them, well, the Anglican equivalent, C and E's, Christmas and Easter. But basically, like the casuals.
Right.
Um, and there's increasingly little benefit to identifying as a Catholic, and so they're just not bothering to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're leaving, and then so they're lapsed Catholics, former Catholics. Some of them become Protestants. Some of them just become religious
Now, of
nuns.
those 850 that
Uh,
leave for every 100 that enter, I'm always kind of a little surprised that Joe Biden is apparently a faithful Catholic, and he actually puts ashes on his forehead during Ash Wednesday, even though he operates against the Catholic Church and denounces its teachings on abortion and homosexuality every time he opens his mouth. Nancy
yeah,
Pelosi is a Catholic, and she sold her soul to the devil long ago. I mean, you can see it in her face.
yeah,
She no longer looks human. So I mean, unfortunately, our church is full of sinners, and I suspect there's Pharisees among our Pharisees.
no doubt. Well, but
I'm actually happy if we can get rid of some of the chaff and separate the wheats and the tares.
that's it. The 840 that are leaving are the ones that it yeah like. But the 100 that are coming in, apparently, at least in the US, they're ones looking for either very reverent Novus Ordo masses or seeking out traditional Latin masses, this sort of
I
thing.
suspect that
And
if Americans come into the Catholic Church, and I think the same might be true of Australians, is it's very different than if you were French or Italian because America has never been a Catholic country. We've
no,
always been
yeah,
Protestant from the get-go, except for Maryland, except for
yeah,
one colony at Maryland. Okay. Uh,
yeah,
Now the Mexicans were always, I mean, the South Americans, the part that was ruled by Spain and Portugal, that's always been very heavily Catholic. And Italy, excuse me, below that, Ireland has also been very heavily Catholic. So when Catholics came over from those areas, the church in America increased. But now Ireland is in really bad shape. They're completely
yeah,
secularized, and they're committing suicide. I don't know of any country that needs the Catholic Church more than Ireland does in order to save itself from being destroyed. They've sold their soul. I mean, literally, the nation doesn't have a soul anymore. They're
yeah,
pro-abortion. They're pro-sexual degeneracy. They are inviting pagan mujahideen and jihadis to come in and rape their women and kill their children, and where's the Fighting Irish? Where's their spirit? I mean, come on, guys. You got St. Patrick on your side. He drove the snakes out. I mean, it's as bad as the English not knowing that the St. George is on their side. Okay.
Well, I think, but I think what we're seeing is, yeah, the people that are coming in are just more serious.
Right.
The people that are leaving are the casuals, and the ones that are arriving are more serious. Apparently, in the US, the religious group with the highest birth rate is sort of traditional Latin mass going Catholics. They have tons of kids.
We don't use contraceptives.
They just follow the rules.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
So, so I think, I don't know. I try to look at things. I mean, I'm always bothered by doomsayers that look around and go, "Oh my god, everything is on fire." And it's like, look, if your horizon is less than a century, it's probably
conservatives.
Too short.
Conservatives, by our very nature, are like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. Conservatives always think things are going downhill because we're usually right, because they usually are. Well, it's called entropy.
No, that's true.
It's called entropy.
But now I can't remember where I heard this. It may have been Bad Shepherds by Rod Bennett. It may have been Joe Heschmeyer. See, I wish I could remember exactly who it was. It's not important. They were talking about the Council of Nicaea, where if you ask most Christians, what is the Council of Nicaea? That's where the Trinity was defined and Arius was thrown out.
Right.
This is true, but if you were a Christian on the ground 10 years after the Council of Nicaea, you would be thinking, we're all doomed. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket. The Arians have taken over and we lost.
Because the Arians had taken over. They'd taken over the imperial court.
Well,
and there was one barbarian tribe up north that decided to go with the Orthodox Catholic Church, and the other ones were all Arian. So yeah,
I mean, the Arians looked to be in ascendance at that time, but a century or so later they were gone.
Right.
So when you
so much so that these modern people don't even know who they are. They think you're talking about the German master race or something.
yeah. But that's it. Like, so so when it comes to the church, if your time horizon isn't centuries, you're probably thinking about it.
Right.
It was Joe Heschmeyer because he was talking about Vatican II. Because a whole lot of people are like, oh my god, Vatican II destroyed the church, blah blah blah. And it's like, I don't.
Vatican
II
was, as far as I can tell, it was grossly misinterpreted. The documents themselves are actually relatively conservative, but there's a lot of people, there's a lot of hippies of the hippie generation who wanted to try to use it as an excuse to get away from the traditional church.
Such is my understanding. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Joe Heschmeyer. He said, well, he pointed back to Nicaea, and it's like, well, we're not going to know how this shakes out for a century or so. Don't try to, don't rush it. Don't panic.
Yeah.
Just the church moves slowly. It's a big ship and it takes a long time to turn.
That's why I like to refer to Vatican time when people talk about, well, why did the Pope wait so long before to make the Assumption of Mary an official doctrine of the church? And I try to explain to people who just don't think like Catholics, and they don't think like Vulcans either. And I just say, look, the Catholic Church doesn't make a definitive statement on anything until it's been debated. And if it's a doctrine that no one for the first 1,600 years of the church had ever even thought to question, they wouldn't even begin to make up the argument to try to support it until the 1600s. And then if it's something that everyone accepts as a doctrine, we don't need to make an official stand on it, okay? And the only reason why this Pope made an official stand on it was because the Virgin Mary had been appearing before and after the Great War and the World Wars, which she predicted, which she said were coming, okay? And it was part of the effort to consecrate Russia to the Virgin so as to put a stake through the heart of the vampire of communism. Because communism is just a cheap knockoff of Christianity anyway. You care for the poor, live together like monks. The only problem is that Marx gets his ideas from Hegel, who gets his ideas from Theosophy, who gets her ideas from Hermeticism, which says that man is God, that God was
Yeah.
their doctrine. I've talked about this before. The doctrine underlying communism is actually a religious doctrine. It's just that Marx had a secular version of it. The doctrine is that there's a
Yeah.
little fragment of a scattered God in everyone, that God cannot see himself, so he has to create sinners in order to understand that he's God, because he's ignorant and groping toward his understanding of Godhead. And that once we understand God, he will understand himself through us, and then then utopia will spontaneously erupt. Okay, now
Hmm.
Marx doesn't believe in God, but he does believe in society. He does believe in the social order. And so he thinks that
Yeah.
there is a material historical process that will lead to utopia that requires bloodshed at every stage. Okay,
Yeah.
and so the doctrine that was spread so rapidly in the 1890s and the 1910s through Europe was the doctrine that destroying every social institution was a necessary precondition to the evolution of man into Superman. In other words, into
Hmm.
Godhead. Now, I think that nightmare is behind us.
It's
I think the shadow has to
it's in
flee,
its death throes.
and it will take another form and come again, but probably not for another few generations. So I think we're past the halfway mark for defeating this woke Marxist
Oh, I think it's on.
nonsense. I think it's circling the
I think
drain, like you said.
the wave is crested definitely.
Now
Um.
here's why I think the future looks bright, and this for two reasons.
Mm,
First, I think that Catholicism offers a coherent and logical worldview.
yep.
When I first stopped being an atheist, I thought you Christians were irrational, and I actually believed that it was true because I had seen visions and such. I'd seen miracles that happened in front of my eyes. I couldn't deny the evidence of my senses. I couldn't deny the evidence of where my logical reasoning had led me, even though I wanted to. But I thought I'd have to give up logic and reason in order to become a Christian because my whole life as an atheist, I thought Christians were irrational. I thought you were like people who believed in Santa Claus. Okay, well, no, you're like people who believed in George Washington. You believe in a guy who actually existed. It was actually quite impressive. Okay, so the Roman Catholic Church has a very strong mystical tradition
Mm,
of people who are seeking spiritual oneness and contemplative prayer. And the Eastern Church also speaks about apotheosis, that God is going to make us little
mm,
gods. Okay,
yeah.
but we also have, unlike the Eastern Church, we also have Thomas Aquinas and a very long tradition of very rigorous logical theological thinking. And so,
Mm,
if anything happens, a Catholic can fit uh, any new event or into his worldview. We have an explanation for the physical sciences. We have an explanation for relativity. We have an explanation for Darwinian evolution, and so on and so forth. If these things turn out to be true or false, they're not going to shake the
we can make
foundations of the
sense of them.
church.
Yeah.
Okay. If I were a biblical literalist, like some of my Protestant brethren are, if Darwinian evolution was ever proved scientifically to be true, and just between you and me, I don't think it can be. It's not a scientific theory.
No,
It's a
it's not.
theosophical theory.
It's a religion.
It's a
Yeah.
religion. It's a religion. But if it
It's a
were,
religious.
if you actually got in a time machine and you went back and you saw the origin of man was not literally the same as the origin given in the Genesis account, that would not shock me. That would not change. That would not cause me to doubt even for an iota. But there are people
No.
who, upon learning that scientists believe the Darwinian religion, suffer from severe doubts. And I've met a guy, maybe more than one, who have lost faith in the church because of that. Well,
Mm,
imagine if you were a liberal and you believe Hitler is a Nazi, and then you go see some famous talk show host go talk to him, and he comes back and says, "No, he's actually a nice guy." You see, your worldview is so brittle, you can't even stand the slightest hint of adverse evidence. You can't explain anything. If you're an atheist, you don't know why the universe exists. You don't even think the question of why does it exist is a coherent question. You don't know what the meaning of
mm,
life is. And you can never know what the meaning of life is. You don't know where morals come
mm,
from. You can't even be sure that morals actually exist except as human opinion. If
mm,
morals are just human opinion, then there's no such thing as unjust laws. There's no such thing as as a tyrant who deserves to be overthrown, which means there's
mm.
no basis for any social progress. You can't
Yep.
prefer democracy to monarchy unless you have a theory of social progress, and you can't have a theory of social progress unless you say the rights don't come from the monarch, the rights don't come from the sovereign. You can't have a
Mm,
theory of aesthetics. You can't understand where beauty comes from, what makes beauty beautiful, or why art should be sublime rather than ugly. And so you fill up your museums with toilets,
bananas on the wall.
with cans of crap, with pictures of the Virgin smeared with elephant dung. Okay,
Mm.
and you can't have a happy marriage because it's not a sacrament to you. You might happen to come across a girl who happens to love you for the whole life, and she will live up to the marriage oath without taking the oath and without taking it seriously, perhaps, maybe. But it's not part of your worldview, you see.
That's a crapshoot.
It's a crapshoot. Whereas if you marry a
Yeah.
Catholic girl, she's not supposed to be able to divorce you. You see, and she's not supposed to make herself sterile once a month, which, by the way, affects her brain chemistry and makes her crazy. So I'm just saying, ladies, if you want to have a happy marriage, if you don't want to be a worker bee working as a drone in a factory, which is what Marx would like to see you, ladies. If you want to be surrounded by giggling, happy children and be cleaning up vomit, which every woman finds is enjoyable as soon as it's cleaned up, because then you get to see them walk. Don't get me wrong. There's ups and downs. I mean, the childhood, the adventure of having a child is as dangerous as a man going to war. I'm completely serious. Look at the Virgin Mary. She had the best kid ever, and he was tortured to death before her eyes. She had to flee her home and go live in Egypt for several years, okay, because they were coming to kill the guy. Okay? Now look, that was a woman who was born without sin. That was the idol of what womanhood should be like. She was both perfect virgin and perfect mother at the same time. Okay, so no matter what age you are, ladies, that's your now, gentlemen. Christ is your model. He's the one whose footsteps we're
Mm.
following. The poor, pathetic Islamics have to follow the example of Muhammad, who married an underage girl, committed horrible acts of war, has a rap sheet as long as my arm for the war crimes he committed, contradicted himself many times in his ridiculous Al Quran, and where they just kind of say, well, what he says later has precedence over what he says earlier. In which case I say, okay, then what he said earlier did not come from an eternal source, then did it? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, compare that with the Roman Catholic Church. If the world turned into an empire as cruel as the Roman Empire, we would be fine. If it turned into a seething hive of intrigue like the Byzantine Empire, we'd be fine. We'd still be there. Monarchy like England, a constitutional monarchy with a Magna Carta, fine. Absolute monarchy like France, fine. Primitive tribesmen in the Americas, fine. I mean, we have what the first saint in America was, and it was an American Indian, a tribesman. Okay, and we can even endure under democracy, though democracies are kind of negatively disposed to organized religion.
Yeah.
Always have been. I mean, the democracy is a great equalizer, and religion is, by its nature, hierarchical.
Mm.
So there's always going to be a tension there, but we'll do fine. But if you're a progressive, your worldview can't even match the world we live in now. Can't even tell you the difference between a man and a woman. Okay, and
Yeah.
when we live in a country where there's basically no racism, they have to manufacture it. They have to make themselves unhappy. They have to introduce sin into their lives in order to keep the scam going that they're the great saviors of the world. So their worldview cannot last. Their materialism can't explain what materialism is set to explain, and we can. So that's why I think we have a robust, flexible, and growing. We have a living spirit animating the church. I believe the spirit animating the Anglican Church, with all due respect to my Anglican brethren, I think it's died. I think that they no longer have a Christian spirit inside them. You see, and I mean, the reason why
That
I think
that
the future looks bright for the Catholic Church is I don't think the alternatives are alive anymore. Maybe I'm being too optimistic. Now, here's the second reason to look forward. I think the future's going to be bright. I think the end times are near and the apocalypse is coming, and there's going to be tribulations, and the Antichrist
potentially.
will rise up. So I think the sun is going
Maybe.
to. I think the moon is going to turn to blood, and the sun is going to burn 1/3 of the people on the earth. Now, you might think that's not very cheery, and maybe at first it doesn't look that happy, but we win at the end. Okay, so that's we're assured of
Either
of
way.
paradise.
Either way. I mean, you know, either the world will end sooner or it won't, and there'll be centuries more or millennia more.
I'm not one of
Either way.
these. I'm not one of these guys that believes in the rapture. I don't think that. The faithful are going to be carried away out of
No.
the because they weren't in the past when the Fatima visions I just mentioned. The little shepherd boys and girls were told, you're going to suffer, and the only question is whether you're going to bear it patiently as God wishes you to. Because if so, then you'll prevail. And the book of the Apocalypse by John, it starts with a letter from Jesus to the 7 churches in Asia. And those letters always end with, if you survive, if you hang on, if you are faithful, if you run the race to the end. Okay? So that's why I think the future looks bright, because the faithful Christians are going to hang on. Tough as bulldogs, okay?
Yeah.
I also have some hope for England, because the English, despite being heathens, excuse me, I'm kidding. They're heretics. They're not heathens. Have always been very tenacious. The Nazis should have beat them, but they hung on. They simply outlasted the Nazis. They hung on. They World War I, they hung on, and so on and so forth.
England is, we'll see.
The
We'll see
bulldog
what
is a
happens with
very
England.
good symbol for England, and so is St. George. Okay, they've slain dragons in the past. I'm hoping they can turn things around.
Unfortunately, all of the dragons are inside their gates, and many of
Sure.
them are their leaders.
Sure.
But that's true in Australia as well.
That's true in the church as well, I'm afraid. We still have the Lavender Hill mob running things in the Vatican.
That's true.
We need a cleansing, so.
But that's okay. The church has needed reform in the past. She'll need reform again.
Correct. Because
she'll get it.
We're the only guys who know the secret of how to die and come back to life again.
So,
am I being too optimistic? Do you think the future looks bright for the church?
I think I agree with you. I think the future looks bright, but the future is, as I said, the horizon is a century or two.
Sure.
It's likely to be bumpy to get there.
Sure.
And of the various evils arrayed against her, they might be dying, but cornered, wounded animals are the most dangerous.
Certainly. And I know from reading Professor Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings that the shadow just can't ever be destroyed. It just takes another form and grows again in another spot that you weren't expecting it. But I will point out that we may have, the space age was a period of history from my youth that you may be too young to remember. There was a time when we walked on the moon, okay, despite what people nowadays say. Well, the second space age is coming. And it's practically on our doorstep. And Elon Musk is one of the main drivers of the second space age. But I'll point out that the first space age, one of the first things that was done was reading from the gospel while the astronauts were in orbit, the American astronauts. The cosmonauts merely made fun of God, those filthy dog murderers. They shot a dog up into space and watched it die.
Yeah.
Okay, they're dog murderers. I hate those guys. And there was a consecrated host was sent up to the moon with one of the 3 men, one of the astronauts who was Catholic, and he did the ceremony. There was a Eucharist eaten on the moon. It was the first thing eaten in outer space that ever passed through human lips. Was the host. There's a little tidbit of history that don't make it in the history books.
No, that's news to me. That's fascinating.
Yep.
So, on that note, I think the future looks bright.
On that note, outer space should be consecrated to the Virgin, the same way the United States was. We've already had the host. It's just a matter of time before Elon Musk is going to need some pilgrims on the moon and Mars, and they're going to have religious needs, and they're going to need pastors, and they're going to need priests. So
yes, I think the future looks bright. It may be bumpy, but
maybe yes, it will be bumpy.
It'll be bumpy, but I think it will move in the right direction. And hey, we get to live forever, so it'll be fine.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Don't fear him who can destroy the body.
Yep.
So,
and may God bless the memory of the Holy Father, because he is now God willing, has been brought to the brought to his reward. So
yep. So on that note, thank you everybody for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. I hope you found this interesting. We'll talk to you next time. We'll be back with the regular show very shortly. I've started editing them.